Up until season 3, Stranger Things was in my view a very fine show. Highly overrated, not at all one of the best, but an undeniably good series. And although the trailer for season 4 seemed to announce its downfall, the season itself came for me as quite a surprise. For the very reason I thought it was going to be the worst one so far, became what in my opinion elevated the show to a whole new level, one I didn't imagine it could reach before. This reason is the season's main antagonist, the mysterious and powerful entity known as Vecna, or more particularly, what he is meant to represent. Gifted with tremendous powers, Henry Creel's goal was to break free of what was for him a straitjacket, a prison, human society. For him, the bad deeds of a person, whether intentionally or unintentionally committed, tainted them forever, and he perceived them trying to move on as hypocrisy. He used his mental abilities to torture those hypocrites psychologically, or in his view hold up a mirror to show them who they really were. He notably targeted his father, Victor Creel, who had unwittingly killed civilians in a shelling in World War II. Henry showed him traumatic scenes and images from his past, thus forbidding him of ever forgetting and moving on with his life. Henry also haunted and later killed in a horrible fashion the rest of his family, his mother Virginia and his sister Alice, who for what we know had committed no such terrible deeds worthy of his retribution. After those murders, he was studied and experimented upon by Dr. Martin Brenner, who identified him as one, the first of his test subjects. It's only 20 years later that Henry managed to break free, manipulating Eleven's good nature to remove the chains that bound him, and he went on to horribly massacre everyone in Hawkins' lab, both staff and children, save for Brenner and Eleven, who both managed to survive. The latter sent him into an alternate dimension, the Upside Down, where he encountered an entity, which would later be known as the Mind Flayer. What the entity and its powers are and what Henry did in the Upside Down is all unclear, as we have no information concerning this as of yet. However, we do know that he made his return 7 years after his forced exile. Now a tentacular, wetly squelching humanoid monster dubbed Vecna, he set on to break the boundary between our world and the Upside Down, cursing Hawkins' teenagers, more particularly those already afflicted with mental issues, with visions related to their traumas. And, after haunting them for 7 days, he killed them in the same horrible fashion as ever, by snapping all their bones one by one and crushing their eyes inside their skulls, all the while torturing them psychologically. And so, he murders in turn Chrissy Cunningham, Fred Benson and Patrick McKinney, as well as, temporarily, Maxine Mayfield. Vecna is a formidable foe to Stranger Things' characters. He is without a doubt the most powerful opponent they ever had to face. But to understand what Vecna truly is and represents, we need to take a closer look at the pattern of his kills. As the show itself has established, Vecna's murders always happen following an unchanging series of events, dubbed by the characters Vecna's Curse. The targets of this curse experience physical symptoms, such as headaches and nosebleeds, and, more notably, psychological symptoms, like for example, nightmares. Those psychological effects of the curse become worse and worse as time goes on, the ever-present nightmares forbidding the victims from ever having a moment of rest. Eventually, they experience horrible visions even while awake, first of an ominous grandfather clock, and then, most importantly, of twisted images of their past traumas, leading them into a terrified and isolated state. And then finally, after 1 week of this torture, they are killed by Vecna, put into a trance, levitated into the air, and left as disfigured corpses, their eyes crushed and bones snapped. Chrissy Cunningham was the first victim of this curse. She was haunted by twisted visions of her mother's remarks about her weight. Desperately trying to escape those visions, and unable to confide in Jason Carver, her boyfriend, she went to her school counselor with little effect, before turning to Eddie Munson for drugs, hoping they might help her silence the phantoms plaguing her. However, they caught up to her first, and she succumbed to Vecna's curse on March 21st, 1986. Fred Benson was the second victim of the curse. He experienced visions triggering his guilt for being partly responsible for the death of one of his friends in a car crash. He ran away, hoping for this torture to end, but he only fell deeper into the vision, seeing his friend's funeral and the latter's family repeatedly blaming him, telling him that he was a murderer. Trying to escape this new vision, he was only faced with the crash that caused him so much guilt, and succumbed to Vecna's curse on March 22nd, 1986. Patrick McKinney was the fourth victim of the curse. Though he was haunted with visions of his father denigrating and abusing him, telling him that he was nothing but worthless, He couldn't show any signs of it or tell anyone about it, fearing his bigoted friends' reactions and mockeries. Unable to ask for help or to find an escape, he succumbed to Vecna's curse on March 25, 1986. Maxine Mayfield was the third and last victim of Vecna's curse, and the only one who was able to escape him, although temporarily. She was haunted by visions of the death of her stepbrother, a death she had, although never genuinely, wished for. She often suffered from headaches, for which she took medication in secret, hiding and isolating herself from her friends and her now ex-boyfriend. She reached the final stage of the curse on March 24, 1986, but was saved by her friends, who used her favorite music to snap her out of her trance. However, she remained Vecna's target, and he twisted the words of those supporting her to in turn hurt her even deeper. The corruption of her best memories was the final straw, and, although only temporarily, she succumbed to Vecna's curse on March 27, 1986. What Vecna himself really is an extent of what Vecna's curse represents. A curse targeting those affected with traumas, guilt or complexes, driving them further and further away from everything and everyone until, eventually, it takes them entirely. Though fictional and involving supernatural elements, Vecna's curse actually exists in our own world. However, we give it another name. What Vecna's curse is and represents is depression. Depression is a mental illness. It is not just a temporary sad phase, but a major psychological condition that is to be taken very seriously. Its symptoms affect the way those suffering from it think and act. Depression can cause a disinterest and lack of motivation for activities previously loved and enjoyed, sleeping disorders such as insomnia, a constant feeling of worthlessness or guilt, as well as, for the more severe cases, suicidal thoughts. Depression, just like Vecna's curse, twists the words of those dearest to you, making them hurt you with things they did not even say or think. It feasts upon your trauma, and, whether it be with guilt or self-hatred, keeps it ever present in your mind, as though something that took place years ago just happened yesterday. Not unlike Vecna, it forbids you from ever moving on from anything. Though this is supported by the show's events and imagery, it may sound like a reach, for this allegory is, well, an allegory, intrinsically not explicit. However, through simple insinuations and suggestions, the series allows us to identify various elements and lets us piece together the unspoken story and struggles of Vecna's victims. From a young age, Chrissy suffered verbal abuse regarding her weight from her mother. This, along with her father's lack of reaction and response, had long-lasting consequences for her, rendering her overly self-conscious about her weight and affecting her with eating disorders, such as anorexia and bulimia. Stuck in her role as the head of the cheerleaders, the queen of Hawkins High, she was expected to be perfect in all regards, expected to date Jason Carver, the captain of the basketball team, therefore stuck in a toxic relationship with no apparent genuine love, with a boyfriend she could not confide in, controlling her interactions with others, seeing her less as a human being and more as a trophy, an object of his prestige. Effectively, she could never really do what she wanted to do, be who she wanted to be. Robbed of her sense of agency by the expectations of others, she simply couldn't be herself. She desperately sought an escape, any escape, and seeing that her sessions with the school counselor were of little to no help, she turned to drugs. There, she met Eddie Munson, a man she couldn't be seen interacting with due to her status, a man who could make her genuinely laugh for the first time in a long time. But unfortunately for her, by this point it is already too late. As Eddie leaves her for a moment to grab the drugs she asked for, her fears find her once more, and this time they get the better of her. After being involved in a car crash, Fred had run home in a panic instead of calling for help, which led to one of his friends' death. Although he himself survived, Fred constantly carried a burden far too great, his guilt literally scarring him for life. In his view, he had left his injured friend to die, and that made him nothing more than a killer. After Chrissy's death, he and Nancy went to interview possible witnesses. As they got closer to the murder scene, Fred's past came to haunt him again, revigorated by the calamity the town had just lived. He feared that as they investigated the murder, those who knew him would learn what he had done, see him for what he considered himself as, for who he really was, a murderer. While Nancy was interviewing Eddie's uncle, he tried to escape the place he thought was causing this resurgence of his trauma, by running away into the forest. However, in doing so, he only found himself alone and vulnerable, and his state of mind only worsened. His memories of his friend's funeral came back more vivid than ever, further strengthening his guilt and self-hatred. He eventually wound up in a roadway, similar to the one where the accident had occurred. This further intensified his anguish, and he found himself directly plunged back into his memories of the crash. Reliving this traumatic event proved too much for Fred, who was unable to withstand it. Knowing that they would have mocked him, dismissed him, or worse if he did, Patrick could never confide in his bigoted friends, although he was always in their company. He therefore suffered in silence from his father's abuse and reproaches, constantly feeling like he was worthless, an embarrassment, a failure of his son and the shame of his family. As Hawkins suffered tragedy after tragedy, he witnessed his friends descend into violence and the town's descent into fear and chaos. Forced to comply to their ruthless and relentless witch hunt, so that he wouldn't become a target of this hunt himself, he was only pushed into further believing his father's words that he was only a disgrace. Those thoughts reached their peak when he realized that those they were pursuing were only terrified people suffering from the same things he was, and it was the last straw for Patrick, who could not handle living in such a harmful environment anymore. Although he was rude and even sometimes abusive toward her, Max mourned the death of her stepbrother, Billy Hargrove. Most importantly, she felt responsible for it, as she had sometimes wished for him to disappear from her life, and as, in her views, she had done nothing to save him when she could have. Not only that, but she afterwards thought about the possibility of them becoming closer, friends, a possibility that she no longer had, and in her mind, she only had herself to blame for that. With little to no self-esteem left, she ended up wishing their places had been swapped, and thinking that he deserved to live more than she ever could. For the year that followed, she isolated herself from her friends and her boyfriend Lucas Sinclair, who she even broke up with despite their mutual love. Her seclusion facilitated and somewhat encouraged by the departure of Eleven and Will to California and the undermining of the group's bond. In doing so, she unwittingly put away those who could help her escape this pernicious mindset. After a while, she began having darker thoughts. Her guilt was getting so great that she wished for herself to disappear just to be free from it. Her dark thoughts almost got the better of her, and she was convinced that she had no hope of escaping them, going so far as to write letters for her close ones to read when she was gone. But her friends managed to make her snap out of it at the last moment, reminding her of all the great moments they had lived. They made her realize that although she suffered atrociously and only felt utter loneliness, she wasn't alone, she was loved, she had people caring for her. They made her realize that there was more to her life and future than her guilt, and thus they became her pillar, preventing her from falling even deeper into darkness. However, unfortunately for her, the threat was still looming. Though she had set defenses in her mind so that this situation would never happen again, her dark thoughts still managed to creep into her head, bypassing the barriers she put in place, entering her mind through new, deeper, more insidious ways. This time, they twisted Lucas's words, corrupting her moments with him, the memory of their first kiss, her best memory that was her escape from it all. Her guilt and self-hatred shattered the only support she had, and she was left unable to do anything but drown. Vecna's curse symbolizes depression, and it worsening as time goes on represents sinking deeper and deeper into this dark maelstrom. As for Vecna himself, he is the ghastliest and most dreadful eventuality the curse leads to. Vecna is at first nothing but a shadow, a suggestion. As his target falls deeper and deeper into his web, his presence becomes more and more tangible, and he begins to take form in their mind. He becomes less of a mere spectre and more of a monster, hunting, stalking them. And then, he corrupts the entirety of their mind, twisting all their thoughts so that there is only him. From his place as a monster, he becomes all there is, the only thing in their mind, the only truth, the only way. He imposes himself as an inevitability against which it would be useless to struggle. As for the last of his victims' will to resist, to be free, to overcome him, to live, he ensnares it, he traps it, he renders it unable to fight or to run. And only when that last shred of hope finally gives in, when he has his target fully in his grasp, he deals the final blow, gives the final push, delivers the tiny impulsion necessary. And then all of a sudden, his victim is no more. This is what Vecna is. A pernicious threat targeting those vulnerable, who tortures their minds, takes everything from them until they have nothing left, nothing but him, the culmination of all the suffering caused by his curse. What Vecna is suicide. Narratively, Vecna's existence in the story notably serves as a mirror for Eleven's character. He is her equivalent, what she could be if she used her powers for evil rather than good. He introduces contrast. He has the same abilities, has been experimented upon the same way, and both allowed each other to grow stronger. Even in their denomination, they are opposites of one another. And these similarities create conflicts for Elle. She fears doing the same horrible things he did, even tricking herself into thinking his deeds were her own. For the entire season, she wonders if she's a monster or a superhero. In other words, she fears ending up like him. Their contrast can also be showcased in the way they use their abilities. While Vecna feeds on sadness and anger, intense but ultimately superficial emotions, 11 is empowered by love, weaker in appearance, but much, much deeper. In addition to that, through the allegory that he introduces, Vecna adds new layers to the show and more depth to the story, building upon subjects introduced earlier in the series. Trauma and dealing with trauma have always been a core theme of Stranger Things, and Season 4 is no exception, all the while adding a darker twist to it. Vecna shows that not everyone can grow beyond their guilt and fears, not everyone can escape their darker thoughts and stop them from taking over. But there's even more to it. Vecna isn't a mere allegory destined to be analysed and deciphered, much like I've been doing throughout this video. He has a real, concrete influence in our world, because he shows in an impactful and meaningful way what depression looks and feels like. He allows for a deeper and more personal comprehension to those who may not truly know what it is. In other words, he raises awareness. He demonstrates that it's not just feeling sad, that it's not the person's fault, and that it deserves to be treated very seriously. Vecna displays in a very graphic and admittedly fantasized way the horrors one lives when suffering from depression, and what it may lead to if allowed to persist. But Vecna's influence doesn't limit itself to those who do not suffer from depression. He also impacts those afflicted by it. Indeed, they can relate to the characters, and most notably to Vecna's targets. This makes them feel seen, heard, and understood, which goes a long way to help in their struggles. This is but another effect of raising awareness. However, it isn't, in my opinion, the most important one Vecna has. Depression, when at its most critical stages, induces a deep and seemingly inescapable feeling of despair, which slowly turns into desperation. Their state of mind is so painful, so excruciating, that they become willing to consider every solution, dangerous and unthinkable as they may be. This point is where suicidal ideas become truly threatening, because they become a real possibility in the person's head. And just like in Stranger Things, they slowly take over their mind until only those ideas are left. And that is where Vecna's existence comes into play. In every sense of the word, Vecna is a monster. His goals are vile, and his methods are despicable. He is, undeniably, evil. And this is what helps. Vecna is a personification of suicide. He embodies it. And so, for those who have suicidal thoughts, he serves as a reminder that it is not a solution, that it isn't the way, that it isn't a cure but an evil enemy with evil intentions that doesn't seek to help you but to provoke your demise in the most horrible way. Vecna lets us see through the veil of deceit dressed before our eyes and recognize suicide for what it is, free from the delusions and the lies brought by the mindset induced by depression. So, if you ever find yourself having those thoughts, remember that suicide is not what it looks like. It is not a solution, an easy way out, but an evil full of lies and deception, and whose only goal is to cause you harm, as much harm as it can. Remember that if you consider it an inevitability, it is because you are coerced into making it so, and you can undo it. Remember that no matter how dire your situation looks, you are strong. You can overcome it. You've come this far, you have already fought and won, and you can fight and win again. Remember that this state of mind is not permanent, that you have been free from it before, and that you will be again. There is a future where you are happy, and this future is reachable. All it takes is for you not to give up on it. Remember that this is not your fault. You are not responsible for it. You deserve happiness, you deserve life. Remember that you are not alone. You may think that you are, it may even look true, but it is not. You have people caring for you, people who love you, people who want you to feel better, who want you to live. And if you think this is false, then I can swear that it is true about me. Even if I do not know you, even if I may never meet you or talk to you, know that I care about you. Know that I want you to feel better, that I want you to live, that I know that you have your place in this world, and that it is better with you in it. If you ever feel like you are slipping away, or that you may be in danger, there are people you can call, who will listen to you and help you feel better. These numbers are on your screen right now. Please, get help if you need it. There is no shame in it, it is only natural. And if you know someone who may struggle with these issues, don't forget to be there for them. Don't forget to remind them that you love them, that they matter to you. If they come asking for help, please help them. Asking for help is already difficult enough as it is to be faced with dismissal or rejection as well. Don't forget to listen to them if they are confiding in you. Do not be judgmental, demeaning, or infantilizing. It will only hurt them even more. Furthermore, do not force them to tell you something or to do something because you deem it better for them. Respect their decision if they say no. However, you must not forget that you cannot solve their problems on your own, not only because you are not qualified to do so, but also because it is not your responsibility. Do not forget yourself in trying to help others. Investing yourself emotionally is unavoidable, but do try not to let it drag you toward the same depths. You may encourage them to talk to a specialist, a psychologist or a psychiatrist, or advise them to talk about it to their doctor so that they can refer them to one and help them. But once again, respect their decision if they say no. And if you notice signs that they may be drifting towards darker thoughts, the previous advices become absolute priorities. Be there for them, talk to them. And if the situation requires it, if they will not do it, call emergency services yourself. These numbers are on your screen right now. Please, whomever you may be, stay safe and take care of yourself. Thank you very much for watching this video until the end. It may not have been an easy ride, and I greatly appreciate your efforts if you indeed managed to reach this point. If this kind of video interests you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already done so to be notified when new ones come out. You can also leave a like on this video or comment your thoughts about it if you wish to do so. Your support is greatly appreciated. This video was not an easy one to write. Unlike my video on Attack on Titan and the cycle of violence, the challenge was not in the thought process necessary to establish a link between a theme and the characters and events of the story. Rather, it necessitated a heavy and difficult emotional investment, the topic addressed inducing a sometimes painful introspection. This video was particularly close to my heart, as depression is a subject that is profoundly meaningful for me personally. I have suffered from it, I have friends who suffered and still suffer from it, and it was therefore very important for me to do it justice. That is why I had the text for this video reviewed by a psychologist, to make sure that the descriptions and information were accurate. It is when I saw the end of episode 4 with the famous running up that hill scene that the symbolic meaning of Vecna hit me. The imagery was too specific, and what Vecna said and did during this scene, as well as the use of music to escape his curse, hit too close to home for it to be meaningless or coincidental. And the more I thought about it, the more I could see this allegory. And although it took a backseat for the remainder of the first half of season 4, for lore and story purposes, I was really glad to see it back for the last episode. The twisting of Lucas's words being what pushes Max all the way down was so accurate that it was beyond what I could have expected from the return of this theme. And after the season ended, I just had to make a video about it. So, here we are. As for what concerns Stranger Things and its story more directly, I do not claim to hold the definite truth. You are totally free to disagree with things I've said, even more so since I added a few theories of mine into the mix. I do not claim to have been exhaustive either, or to have treated in their integrality the themes the series addresses. This isn't my goal in the first place. I only hope I made you think about Vecna and what he represents in Stranger Things, and to have offered you new perspectives you maybe wouldn't have thought about before. You can join my Discord server and follow me on Instagram if you wish to do so. All links are in the description. That's it for me. I'll see you around.